Good morning. I'm Blake Switzer, lead pastor at Gateway Community Church, and I want to welcome you to my home this morning. Unfortunately, we're not able to gather in person, and I really do miss being with you this morning, but I'm excited to spend some time together anyway. And we're going to continue on in the series. We're actually wrapping it up today. We've been in this series called Compelled, the Unstoppable Compassion of Jesus. And we've had the opportunity to see the heart of Jesus and how it's just compelled toward different groups of people, starting with a leper who was just desperate for healing. And Jesus not only healed him, he touched him, incredible compassion in that. We saw a parable Jesus told about a Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee that was self-righteous, but the heart of Jesus was drawn toward the tax collector that was crying out for mercy. And then last week, we looked at a religious leader. We looked at Nicodemus, somebody who was honestly seeking answers. Jesus' heart was drawn toward him as well. So today, we're going to wrap it up with actually another tax collector. Jesus seemed to have a soft heart, a soft place in his heart for tax collectors. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 19 today, the story of Zacchaeus. I would love for you to follow along with me, but I'm just going to start reading Luke 19, starting in verse 1, it says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. The very beginning of this passage today, we see that it says Jesus was entering Jericho and was passing through. A little bit later in chapter 19, I think it's verse 28, it tells us that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. And this was common. On the way to Jerusalem, you would pass through Jericho. In fact, it was a place that people would often rest a bit before a long and really challenging journey. Jericho sat about 600 feet below sea level. Jerusalem was 2,500 feet above sea level. So it was over 3,000 feet of elevation gain going from one to the other. It was about a 17-mile hike. It would go through dry, arid places, not a lot of water. It was dangerous. It was known for bandits and other things. So this was a tough journey. I don't know how many of you like to hike out there. If you do, it will probably resonate a little bit to stop and think about 3,000 feet of elevation change. That's a lot. The last time I did that was about 1.5 years ago at Wheeler Peak in New Mexico, and it just about killed me. That was really hard. It was actually a little less than 3,000 feet of elevation change. So it's a long journey, and Jesus is preparing for that. But while he is there, we are introduced to a man by the name of Zacchaeus. Now, something interesting about his name, this name Zacchaeus, it means righteous, or somebody that was innocent. That's what the name itself means. And this is anything but the case for Zacchaeus at this point. He was a tax collector. He was somebody who cheated people out of their money and was not innocent, was not righteous at all. But how many times in the Bible do we see where Jesus in an encounter, or where God has an encounter with somebody and he changes their name, and he changes the name to match who they're going to become? In this case, Jesus doesn't change his name. He actually changes who Zacchaeus is to match what his name already says. So he's getting there. He was a tax collector. It says in verse 3 that he wanted to see who Jesus was. And then there's this little detail here, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So Zacchaeus had to find a way to get a glimpse of Jesus. I do find it interesting that he was interested in seeing Jesus when all the religious people and those that should have been paying attention to who Jesus was really weren't. Those that had been teaching about the coming of the Messiah Didn't seem to have much of an interest, but people like Zacchaeus did. So verse 4 says that Zacchaeus ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree and he waited for Jesus to come. Sycamore fig trees were known for having sturdy branches. They were easy to climb. And so Zacchaeus gets up into the tree and he waits for Jesus. You know, at the end of chapter 18 in Luke, right before this chapter, Jesus says that anyone that comes to him must come with the faith of a child. And I just wonder if there's some connection there of Zacchaeus being willing to climb up a tree to try to find Jesus. I don't know about you. I have fond memories as a kid of climbing trees, and that just seems like a very childlike thing to do, but that's what we see Zacchaeus doing here. So he climbs a tree. He's waiting for Jesus to come by. And then verse 5. Verse 5 says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Man, I wish I knew what was going through Zacchaeus' mind at this point. You know, I don't know what his expectation was. I suspect that he probably thought Jesus would just pass by. He certainly didn't expect Jesus to know who he was or to speak to him. And he does. Even though nobody would have given another thought had Jesus just walked on by. But he sees Zacchaeus in the tree. And he actually invites himself over for dinner. What we see Jesus doing here is exactly what he said his mission was in verse 10, that he came to seek and to save the lost. He's actually putting this into practice. And so he invites himself to come to Zacchaeus. In fact, it says, I must stay at your house today. That word that he uses there, it's the same word that he used in John 4, when it says, John 4:4, Jesus told his disciples, I must go through Samaria. Nobody did that back then. They would all go around Samaria. Jesus said, I must go through. Not because he literally had to do it, but because he had a divine appointment in Samaria with a woman at a well that would change her heart, her life, her whole town that she was from. It was a divine appointment. That's what Jesus is saying here. When he said, I must come to your house today, that's why he came. He came to seek out those that were willing to have a relationship with him, willing to get to know him. And that's the same heart that you and I should have as well. In fact, you know, it reminded me of a passage in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 5 is talking about our role as ambassadors of Christ. And it says that God makes his appeal through us and we're to share it. But here's the part that really kind of stood out to me. I was thinking about this and thinking about Zacchaeus, because nobody would have expected that a man like Zacchaeus would be open to hearing about who Jesus was. In 2 Corinthians 5:15, the first part of 16, it says, and he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. And then he adds this comment. So from now on, we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Interesting little comment there right before the very next verse in 17 that talks about if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. I think what he's saying here is, don't ever assume that people don't want to know the good news. I think sometimes I can be guilty of that. I think, well, that's probably somebody that wouldn't be interested in hearing that, right? Or you ever see somebody and you think, oh man, that person is so far gone, probably not anything that's going to happen to change that. But that's not true. Jesus does change hearts like that. He did it with Zacchaeus. It's a good reminder for us to have that same mindset and to see people just as the way Jesus does, see them through his lens. But when Jesus invites himself to come have a meal with Zacchaeus, verse 6 says, so he came down at once and he welcomed him gladly. Again, man, I'd love to know what was going through his mind. I don't know if there was even just a little tiny flash when Jesus said, I'm coming to your house, where he thought, oh my goodness, am I in trouble? Is this bad news? But it's not. It's good news. And he seems to recognize that. Maybe it was through the facial expression or just the demeanor of Jesus. But he's excited to have Jesus come into his home. It says that he welcomed him gladly. But then contrast that to the response of the crowd. Verse 7, all the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. As I think this is such a sad verse, because here Jesus is about to change the heart of somebody who really needs his heart changed. but all the people can think about is how much they hate this man. And, I get it. I understand that he was cheating them out of their money. He was considered to be a traitor because he was in cahoots with Rome. And I get it. But all they could see was he's going to be the guest of a sinner. Again, just kind of this self-righteous attitude rather than understanding that that's why Jesus came, was to do this kind of thing. But Zacchaeus, verse 8, stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." What we see here is that the heart of Zacchaeus really is being changed. This is not just lip service. He's saying, look, I'm going to show you that I have a new heart on the inside. I'm going to prove it by the things that I do. He's not doing this. The next verse, in verse 9, it says, "Today salvation has come to this house." That's what Jesus said. Not because Zacchaeus was willing to give away his possessions and pay back the people he cheated. That's not what he's saying. He's not earning his salvation. It's because he came to know Jesus and his heart was changed that this is genuine repentance. Here's what this is showing. He is wanting to make things right. And really what Zacchaeus is doing here is following the law. In Exodus, I think it's 22, verse 1, it says that if someone steals a sheep, that they are required to make restitution by giving 4 times as many back. They have to pay back 4 sheep. So I think what Zacchaeus is doing here is he's just following the law and saying that I'm going to do what's right in God's eyes. But he's willing to do it. And when I read his reaction to Jesus, I couldn't help but to think about the guy that we sometimes refer to as the rich young ruler. Jesus came to him. He said, "Lord, what must I do to be saved?" And he said, "I want you to sell your possessions, give to the poor." Basically, he was seeing if his heart was really in it. And it says that he went away sad because he had great wealth. What a different reaction here. Zacchaeus doesn't hold on to what he has. He says, I want to share it with people, and he's willing to do that. And that just shows that his heart's been changed. So Jesus tells him, "Today salvation's come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham." And then he ends with verse 10, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." And I just want to end there as well today with that reminder, no matter where you are. Maybe you find yourself in a place where you're like, I don't think Jesus would have anything to do with me. I don't think a church would want to have anything to do with me. That's so not true. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. And if there's never been a time where you've just said, "Jesus, I believe in you. I'm going to give my heart to you," today would be a great day to do that. But this is also a great reminder for those of us that do know Christ. If that was his mission, it should be ours too. We are to seek and to save the lost. Now, we don't save anybody, but we're to seek them out and tell them about Jesus, point them toward Jesus. And guys, that's our passion. That's our heart. And as we prepare for next Sunday, which, by the way, I cannot wait for next Sunday. Next Sunday is our Harvest City Church launch. We're so excited about that, February 1st, and I hope that you'll invite people and come. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it looks like to go out and to seek people out and just to be the representative of Christ. But I also want you to hear me in this. When Jesus left the 99 to go after the one, he wasn't neglecting the 99. And so as much as our heart is, we want to go after the people. We want to take the good news to people in our community. I want you to know too, there's some incredible things coming for our church family as well. The opportunity to grow deeper in discipleship. We'll be talking about that also. So just know that's where we're headed. It's going to be a great day next Sunday. I'm super excited about it. I'm excited about you having the opportunity to just go through some of the discussion questions as well. But before we do that today, before you have the opportunity to do that with your family, I just want to touch on a couple of things because I asked for some feedback from people. And I got a couple of questions that came in from some folks, and actually a comment first that I want to share with you, and then just touch on a couple of the questions. One, somebody said, and this is actually from a friend Mark in Alaska, which is kind of cool, but his comment was this. He said, like the disciples, it's easy to see the muddy sin in others instead of the masterpiece God created them to be. Jesus didn't just call out his sin, but he simply offered to spend time with Zacchaeus. If we're followers of Jesus, we too have to be intentional about seeking people out, hanging out with those that don't know him. And I agree with you, Mark. You're spot on with that. That's absolutely the heart behind this. But then a couple of questions that were sent to me. One, why do you think Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name before he even says a word? Before Zacchaeus even says a word to Jesus? I think that's a great point. Jesus knew him by name. He called him by name. He knew him by name before Zacchaeus said anything. I think that blew his mind. I think for Zacchaeus to hear his name called by Jesus, it's a really good reminder. Jesus knows you by name. He knows you that personally. And then one other question that's kind of tied to this, and I love the honesty of this question. This is somebody that said, how do you feel worthy during the week? And this is someone that's specifically out of work right now. It says, I have over 30 years of work experience, but since we moved here, no one wants to hire me. So I went from being a full-time mom of 5 kids and helping to raise 12 grandkids close by when we lived where we moved from, while working full-time, and now nothing. The only time I feel seen and worthy is at church, surrounded by other believers worshiping together. And she went on and just said, it's hard not to tie identity to a job or to the things that we do. And I think it's a great point. I think we all struggle with that to a certain degree. But what I see in this passage that's so important is for Jesus to seek out Zacchaeus. He wasn't doing that because of what he contributed to society. In fact, he didn't contribute anything. He took things away, but Jesus valued him anyway. And so I think that's just a good reminder for us that our worth is not tied up in the things that we do. It's not tied up in the things that we accomplish. It's who we are. And I love also the comment in that. The comment was, I feel seen and I feel cared for when I'm around other believers at church. That's a big part of the encouragement that he provides for us as well. Guys, it's been great to be able to spend some time with you today. I want to encourage you. Now, we're not finished. What we want you to do is to take time to go through the discussion questions. You may have received a text message about that this morning. If not, you can go to our website, gatewayonline.org, click on the tab that says Bulletin, and in the notes for each week, you'll find those discussion questions for different age groups. And Sean and I are going to talk through those now. I hope that you'll do that with your family as well. Thank you so much for joining in. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.